She thought it was just another Uber ride, not knowing the passenger would be the billionaire CEO who shattered her heart and left her with twins. Part 2. You had no right to keep us from our father. Leo's voice cracked with adolescent emotion as he faced his mother across the kitchen island. Do you know what it's like being the only kid who missed out on his dad teaching him to ride a bike? Or throw a ball? Or all those science fairs he could have helped with? Freya flinched as if she'd been slapped. Leo, you know that wasn't what happened. Your father and I have explained. Explained what? That you chose not to tell him about us. That you decided all by yourself that we didn't need a father. The 12-year-old's eyes, so like Asher's, flashed with betrayal. And now I find out we have a grandmother we've never even met. Freya reached for her son, but he stepped back. Leo, please. My grandson is absolutely right. A regal voice cut through the tension. Edith Montgomery stood in the doorway, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, designer clothes immaculate despite her 70 years. You robbed these children of half their heritage, Ms. Larson. But I'm here now, and I intend to ensure they know exactly who they are. Montgomery heirs with a legacy stretching back 5 generations. Asher appeared behind his mother, his expression a storm of conflicting emotions. Mother, that's enough. You can't just arrive unannounced and start making accusations. Why not? It's the truth. Edith's piercing gaze locked onto Freya. These children deserve to know their birthright. And now that your father is gone, I intend to see the Montgomery legacy preserved through them, whether you and this woman approve or not. Have you ever wondered what happens when the family you've carefully built faces threats from both within and without? What if the secrets you thought were buried for good suddenly resurface, just as your children are old enough to question everything you've told them? Today's story continues 5 years after our Uber driver and her billionaire passenger reunited, showing that sometimes the hardest battle isn't finding your family. It's keeping it together when the past refuses to stay buried and children old enough to form their own opinions start questioning everything you thought they understood. The late May sunshine streamed through the windows of the Montgomery Larson home, illuminating the breakfast table where just moments earlier the family had been enjoying a peaceful Saturday morning. 5 years had transformed the temporary arrangement at Asher's country house into a permanent home, filled with the comfortable chaos of family life and 1,000 memories both ordinary and extraordinary. Family photos lined the walls, chronicling the twins' growth from curious 7-year-olds to the confident 12-year-olds they had become. The floor-to-ceiling windows still offered the same stunning view of Puget Sound, but now the property felt lived in, personalized, a true home rather than a showcase. Freya stood frozen in the kitchen, the celebratory pancakes she'd been making for the twins' middle school graduation forgotten on the counter. She hadn't seen Edith Montgomery in over 13 years, not since that disastrous dinner at the beginning of her relationship with Asher when his mother had made it abundantly clear that Freya, the scholarship student with working-class parents, was not the caliber of woman the Montgomery heir should be considering for marriage. And now here she was, uninvited and unannounced, passing judgment as if the intervening years had never happened, as if Freya hadn't built a successful life and raised 2 remarkable children. Mother, Asher said, his voice tight with controlled emotion, we didn't know you were coming to Seattle. You should have called. Would you have welcomed me if I had? Edith challenged, removing her designer sunglasses to reveal eyes exactly like her son's and her grandchildren's. After you missed your own father's funeral, I had little hope you'd roll out the welcome mat for me. Leo's eyes widened at this revelation, his gaze darting accusingly to his father. You missed grandfather's funeral? Why didn't you tell us he died? It's complicated, Leo, Asher began, running a hand through his hair in the gesture both twins had inherited. Your grandfather and I had a difficult relationship, which might have been repaired if you'd brought my grandchildren to see him before he passed. Edith interjected sharply. He died believing his legacy would end with you, that the Montgomery name had no future beyond your generation. That was his choice, Asher countered. He made it clear years ago that I was a disappointment to him, that I'd failed the Montgomery legacy by prioritizing innovation over tradition. Zoe, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during this exchange, finally spoke. Did our grandfather know about us at all? The simple question, delivered with Zoe's typical directness, momentarily silenced the adults in the room. Edith recovered first, her aristocratic features softening as she addressed her granddaughter. He knew you existed, yes, but he never had the chance to meet you, to know what remarkable children you are. Her gaze moved meaningfully to Freya. Despite certain obstacles. That's enough, Mother, Asher said firmly. The children have their middle school graduation ceremony this afternoon. This isn't the time for family history lessons or recriminations. On the contrary, Edith replied, seating herself at the kitchen island as if she'd been invited. A graduation is precisely the moment to consider one's heritage and future path. I've come to Seattle permanently. In fact, I've purchased a home in Madison Park and enrolled the children in Lakeside School for the fall. Their Montgomery legacy demands the finest education available. You did what? Freya found her voice at last, anger overriding her initial shock. You have no authority to make educational decisions for our children. Our children, Edith repeated with a slight emphasis that spoke volumes. How quickly you claim equal status now that Asher's company has tripled in value. I wonder if you'd have been so eager to share parenthood if he'd remained the struggling entrepreneur he was when you kept these children's existence from him. Leo, always alert to undercurrents, narrowed his eyes at this insinuation. What do you mean, grandmother? I mean, dear boy, that there are aspects of your early childhood that might benefit from a perspective beyond your mother's carefully curated version. Edith's smile held no warmth. But as your father says, today is for celebration. We can discuss family matters more thoroughly once I'm settled in Seattle. Mother, Asher's voice dropped to a warning tone. The twins are perfectly happy at their current school. Freya and I make decisions about their education together, as we have for the past 5 years. 5 years out of 12, Edith noted pointedly. Less than half their lives. Such a shame they missed so much time with their father and his family. The calculated comment landed precisely as intended. Leo's expression darkened with renewed doubt, while Zoe looked uncertainly between her parents. Freya felt a familiar anxiety rising in her chest, the fear that despite all they had built together, despite the life they had created as a family, the shadows of the past could still threaten their happiness. Leo, Zoe, she said with forced calm, why don't you go get ready for the ceremony? Your dress clothes are laid out in your rooms. But Mom, Leo began to protest. Now please, Asher backed her up, his tone gentle but firm. We need a few minutes with your grandmother. The twins exchanged one of their silent communications, then reluctantly left the kitchen, though Freya had no doubt they would attempt to eavesdrop from the hallway. At 12, their curiosity was insatiable, particularly about family matters that adults tried to shield them from. Once they were gone, Freya turned to Edith, her professional composure, honed through years of leading her own tech company, the only thing keeping her voice steady. I understand you've lost your husband, and I'm sorry for that. But arriving unannounced, making educational plans without consulting us, and undermining me in front of my children is completely unacceptable. Your children? Edith raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. They are Montgomerys, whether they bear the name or not. I can see it in every feature, every gesture. Particularly Leo, he has the Montgomery analytical mind, the drive for excellence. And Zoe has the family's artistic sensibility, the ability to charm that served Montgomerys for generations. They're Larsons too, Freya countered. And they've been raised with values that have nothing to do with family names or legacies. Values like deception? Edith asked silkily. Like denying children knowledge of their father for 7 years? Mother, stop. Asher moved to stand beside Freya, his shoulder touching hers in silent support. What happened between Freya and me 13 years ago is our business, and we've made peace with it. We've explained the situation to the twins in age-appropriate ways throughout their lives. Age-appropriate, Edith repeated skeptically. How convenient. Tell me, do they know about the cease and desist letter? About how their mother was escorted from your office building when she tried to tell you about her pregnancy? Freya paled. They had indeed simplified that part of the story for the twins, explaining that there had been communication problems and misunderstandings rather than detailing the humiliation and legal threats she had faced. That's enough, Asher said, his voice hardening. I won't allow you to use my children as pawns in whatever game you're playing, Mother. If you want to be part of their lives, you'll respect our parenting decisions and the family we've built. Family, Edith scoffed lightly. A convenient arrangement, perhaps. But a true family honors its legacy, It's obligations to past and future generations. Your father understood that, even if you never did. My father understood nothing except his own rigid expectations, Asher countered. And I've spent most of my adult life recovering from the damage those expectations caused. A flicker of genuine emotion, perhaps pain, crossed Edith's aristocratic features before her composure returned. Your father built the foundation that allowed you to succeed, Asher. Everything you have, everything you've achieved, began with the advantages he provided. I'm well aware of my privileges, Mother. I'm also aware of the cost they came with. Asher's voice softened slightly. Look, I'm sorry about Father's passing. I should have been there, regardless of our differences. But if you want a relationship with Leo and Zoe, it needs to be on terms that respect the family we've created, not the one you wish we were. Edith gathered her designer handbag, her movements precise and controlled. I'll see you at the graduation ceremony. We can continue this discussion when emotions are less heated. At the doorway, she paused. They really are remarkable children, Asher. Your father would have been proud, despite everything. After she left, the kitchen fell silent except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of the twins moving around upstairs. Freya leaned against the counter, suddenly exhausted though the day had barely begun. I'm sorry, Asher said quietly. I had no idea she was coming. She's never shown any interest in the twins before. Because your father was alive, Freya replied, understanding dawning. He was her focus, her purpose. Now that he's gone, now she needs a new project, Asher finished grimly. And what better project than the Montgomery grandchildren who haven't been properly integrated into the family legacy? She's going to cause problems, Freya said, voicing what they both knew. Especially with Leo. He's at that age where he's questioning everything, trying to figure out who he is separate from us. Your mother's version of events will appeal to him. Our version of events is the truth, Asher reminded her, taking her hand. We've never lied to the twins, even if we've simplified some of the more complicated aspects until they were old enough to understand. But that's just it. They're reaching the age where they want the full truth, not the simplified version. And if we don't provide it, they'll seek it elsewhere. Freya glanced toward the ceiling, thinking of their increasingly independent children, from sources that might not have their best interests at heart. Like my mother, Asher acknowledged. We'll talk to them tonight, after the ceremony. Give them more details appropriate to their current age and understanding. Together, Freya nodded, grateful for his unwavering partnership over the past 5 years. Whatever challenges Edith Montgomery's arrival might bring, they would face them as they had faced everything else since reuniting, as a team, prioritizing the twins' well-being above all else. The graduation ceremony itself was a study in barely contained tension. Edith had arrived early, securing a prime seat near the front and greeting other parents with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to moving in elite circles. When the twins spotted her in the audience, their reactions had been tellingly different. Leo straightening with newfound awareness of his public appearance, Zoe offering only a cautious wave. Afterward, during the reception in the school gymnasium, Edith had smoothly inserted herself into conversations with the twins' teachers, asking probing questions about their academic performance and potential. Freya had watched with growing concern as Leo particularly seemed to blossom under his grandmother's focused attention and lavish praise. She's good, Naomi observed, appearing at Freya's side with a plastic cup of punch. In the 5 years since the family had settled into their new life, Naomi had remained Freya's closest friend and most trusted confidant. Very strategic in her approach. Montgomerys usually are, Freya replied, watching as Edith introduced Leo to the headmaster of Lakeside School, who had apparently been invited specifically for this purpose. She's already positioning herself as the gateway to opportunities they didn't even know they wanted. The twins are smart, Naomi reminded her. They won't be easily manipulated. They're 12, Freya countered. Brilliant, yes, but still children navigating the complicated terrain between childhood and adolescence. And Edith is offering something very appealing, a grand family narrative, a sense of belonging to something historic and important. More appealing than the actual loving family they've grown up in. Naomi sounded skeptical. At this age? Maybe. Freya sighed, watching Leo absorb whatever the headmaster was saying with rapt attention. Especially for Leo. He's been asking more questions lately about the years before Asher came into our lives. I think he's struggling with what he perceives as missing pieces in his personal history. And Grandma Montgomery is showing up with a convenient family album to fill in those gaps, Naomi concluded. With her own interpretation, of course. Exactly. That evening, as promised, Asher and Freya sat down with the twins in the living room for what had become known in their household as a family council, their term for important discussions that affected everyone. The graduation celebrations had left the twins tired but wired, still in their dress clothes though Zoe had kicked off her shoes and Leo had loosened his tie. "We know you have questions about Grandmother Montgomery's arrival," Asher began, choosing his words carefully, "and about some of the things she said this morning. Like why you missed Grandfather's funeral?" Leo asked immediately. "Or why we never met him before he died?" "Yes, like that," Asher acknowledged. "My relationship with my father was complicated. He had very specific ideas about what it meant to be a Montgomery, about the responsibilities and obligations that came with the family name. When I chose a different path, pursuing technology and innovation rather than traditional finance and investment, he saw it as a rejection of our family legacy." "So he disowned you?" Zoe asked, always quick to the heart of matters. "Not legally, no, but emotionally, in many ways, yes." Asher's expression reflected old pain, long managed but never fully healed. "When my first company was struggling, when I most needed support and guidance, he made it clear that my failures were the result of not following the path he had laid out for me." "That's when you went to Singapore," Leo said, connecting the dots they'd been given over the years. "When you and Mom separated." "Yes," Asher confirmed. "I was trying to save my company, to prove my father wrong about my choices. I became obsessed with success, with validation through achievement rather than family connection. And that's when I found out I was pregnant," Freya continued, picking up the narrative, after Asher had already left. "But you tried to tell him about us," Zoe prompted, familiar with this part of the story. "There were communication problems." Freya and Asher exchanged a glance, silently agreeing it was time for more transparency given the twins' age and Edith's arrival. "It was more than simple miscommunication," Freya admitted. "When Asher went to Singapore, his business partner Griffin took control of all communications coming into the company. He intercepted my messages, prevented my calls from reaching your father." "Why would he do that?" Leo asked, his brow furrowing in the way that was so reminiscent of Asher. "Because he saw me and my pregnancy as distractions from the company's goals," Freya explained. "When I flew to Singapore to tell your father in person, Griffin had security remove me from the building. Later, I received a legal letter warning me against further contact." Both twins looked shocked at this revelation. "That's horrible," Zoe said, genuine outrage in her voice. "Did Dad know about this?" "Not until years later," Asher assured them. "Not until that night I was a passenger in your mother's Uber. Griffin had told me a very different story, that your mother had been making unreasonable demands, threatening the company's reputation during a critical funding period." "And you believed him?" Leo asked, a note of accusation in his voice. "Without even talking to Mom yourself?" "I did," Asher admitted, not defending himself. "It's one of the greatest regrets of my life. I was so focused on business success, on proving myself to my father and the world, that I lost sight of what really mattered. I trusted the wrong person and made assumptions I should have questioned. But once you knew about us, you wanted to be part of our lives," Zoe said, seeking reassurance. "Right away. Immediately," Asher confirmed, his voice softening. "The moment I learned about you both, everything changed. All my priorities, all my definitions of success, all my plans for the future, they realigned around you, around our family. And that's why Grandfather never met us." Leo pressed. "Because you were estranged?" "Partly," Asher acknowledged. "But it was more complicated than that. When your mother and I reunited, when we decided to build a life together as a family, I reached out to my parents. I wanted them to know their grandchildren." "What happened?" Zoe asked when Asher paused. "Your grandfather set conditions," Asher said carefully. "He wanted you enrolled in specific schools of his choosing, participating in specific activities he deemed appropriate for Montgomerys. He saw you as extensions of the family legacy rather than as individuals with your own interests and personalities. Like Grandmother is doing now," Leo observed perceptively. "With Lakeside School." Yes, Freya confirmed, impressed by her son's insight. Which is why we're concerned about her sudden appearance and interest in your lives. But she's our grandmother, Leo countered. Shouldn't we know her? Know about the Montgomery side of our family. Of course, Asher agreed. Family connections are important, but they should be based on genuine relationships, not obligations or expectations tied to a family name. Your grandmother has never shown interest in knowing you as people, only as Montgomery heirs. Maybe she's changed, Zoe suggested, though she sounded doubtful. Maybe losing grandfather made her realize what's important. Maybe, Freya allowed, though she shared her daughter's skepticism. And if that's the case, if she genuinely wants to build relationships with you based on who you are rather than what you represent, we'll support that connection. But we're asking you to be cautious, Asher added. To remember that your grandmother has her own agenda, her own view of family that may not align with the values we've tried to instill. Leo's expression had grown increasingly troubled throughout the conversation. Why didn't you tell us this before? About the security guards and the legal letter and grandfather's conditions? We're not babies anymore. You're right, Freya acknowledged. We should have shared more details as you've gotten older. We were trying to protect you from some of the more painful aspects of our history, but you deserve to understand your own story. Is there more? Leo challenged. More you're still not telling us. Freya and Asher exchanged another glance. There are always more details, more nuances to any story, Asher said carefully. But the core truth is what we've shared with you from the beginning. Your mother and I loved each other. We're separated by circumstances and misunderstandings, and found our way back to each other through you. Leo didn't look entirely satisfied with this answer, but Zoe yawned widely, the long day of graduation excitement finally catching up with her. I think that's enough family history for tonight, Freya suggested, noting both twins' flagging energy despite their interest in the conversation. We can continue this discussion tomorrow, or whenever you have more questions. I definitely have more questions, Leo assured them, though he too was fighting a yawn. Especially about the Montgomery family history grandmother mentioned. As the twins headed upstairs to bed, Freya and Asher remained in the living room, both sensing their son's lingering dissatisfaction with their explanations. He's pulling away, Freya observed quietly, questioning our narrative, looking for alternative perspectives. It's normal at his age, Asher reminded her, though his expression was concerned. Pre-adolescent identity formation, separating from parents to develop his own sense of self. Very textbook of you, Freya teased gently, appreciating his attempt to rationalize what they both knew was a potential problem. But your mother's arrival couldn't have come at a worse developmental stage. She's offering him exactly what he's searching for, a grand narrative about who he is that exists independently of us. The Montgomery legacy, Asher said grimly. Trust me, it's not the gift she's presenting it as. That legacy nearly destroyed me, Freya. The pressure to be perfect, to prioritize family reputation above personal happiness, to measure success only in terms of wealth and influence. I won't let her do to our children what was done to me. I know. Freya took his hand, drawing strength from the partnership they had built. But we need to be careful. If we oppose her too directly, we risk pushing Leo further into her orbit. Forbidden fruit, and all that. So what do? We stay honest, Freya decided. We answer their questions truthfully, even the difficult ones. We let them form their own opinions about their grandmother based on her actions, not just our warnings. And we trust that the values we've instilled over the past 12 years are strong enough to withstand her influence. Asher nodded, though the worry didn't leave his eyes. My mother can be very persuasive when she wants something. And right now, she wants our children. She'll have to go through us to get them, Freya said firmly. And we're a lot stronger together than we were 13 years ago. The challenge had been issued, the battle lines drawn. What neither of them could have predicted was how quickly Edith Montgomery would move to establish her influence, or how vulnerable their family would prove to the particular weapons she chose to deploy. The Montgomery legacy had arrived on their doorstep, and it would not be easily dismissed. Over the next 2 weeks, Edith Montgomery launched what could only be described as a calculated campaign to integrate herself into the twins' lives. It began with carefully selected gifts. For Leo, a leather-bound set of journals that had belonged to his great-grandfather, the original Montgomery entrepreneur who had built the family fortune through shipping and railroads. For Zoe, an antique silver locket containing a miniature portrait of her great-grandmother, a celebrated pianist and arts patron in Boston society. These are family heirlooms, Edith explained when she delivered the gifts during an ostensibly casual visit. Items that should have been presented years ago, had circumstances been different. The unsubtle dig at Freya's past choices didn't go unnoticed, but the twins were too entranced by these tangible connections to their extended family history to perceive the manipulation behind the gesture. Great-grandfather kept detailed records of all his business ventures, Leo marveled, carefully turning the pages of the oldest journal. Look at these calculations for shipping routes and profit margins. And great-grandmother was friends with actual composers, Zoe exclaimed, examining the additional photographs Edith had brought. There she is with Leonard Bernstein. Edith beamed with satisfaction, settling more comfortably into the living room sofa. The Montgomery family has always moved in distinguished circles, contributed meaningfully to business and culture. It's a legacy you're both very much a part of, whether you bear the name or not. Were you close to grandfather? Leo asked, his curiosity about the grandfather he'd never met increasingly evident. What was he like? Your grandfather was a formidable man, Edith replied, her expression softening with what appeared to be genuine grief. Brilliant with numbers, demanding of excellence, but capable of great generosity to those who earned his respect. He built on his father's foundation, transitioning the family business from shipping to finance with remarkable foresight. And he didn't approve of Dad's tech company, Zoe stated rather than asked, her perceptiveness cutting through the romantic narrative. He didn't understand it, Edith corrected smoothly. Your grandfather was of a different generation, one that valued tangible assets and traditional business models. The digital world was foreign to him. But it made Dad even more successful than grandfather, Leo pointed out, pride in his father evident despite his growing interest in his extended family. Horizon Technologies is worth billions now. Indeed, Edith acknowledged with a tight smile. Your father's success is undeniable, though achieved through methods your grandfather wouldn't have chosen. But that's the prerogative of each generation, to find its own path while honoring what came before. From the kitchen doorway where she had been observing this exchange, Freya noted the careful framing that cast Asher's choices as generational differences rather than outright rebellion. Edith was too shrewd to directly criticize Asher to his children. Instead, she was constructing a narrative where the Montgomery legacy was a constant, adapting through time, but fundamentally unchanged in its commitment to excellence and achievement. It was masterfully done, and all the more concerning for its subtlety. The gifts were just the beginning. Over the following days, Edith invited the twins to her newly purchased Madison Park mansion for what she called family history afternoons. These carefully orchestrated events featured photo albums, family artifacts, and colorful stories about Montgomery achievements through the generations. She took them to the Seattle Symphony where, naturally, she knew the conductor personally. She arranged a private tour of the Burke Museum, where a Montgomery ancestor had donated a significant natural history collection. Each outing, each story, each introduction to Seattle's elite social circles served to reinforce the message. The Montgomerys were exceptional, their legacy distinguished, their social position elevated. And by extension, Leo and Zoe were not merely ordinary children but heirs to this grand tradition, regardless of the more modest circumstances of their early childhood. She's rewriting their origin story, Freya observed worriedly to Asher after yet another Montgomery family history session had returned the twins home bubbling with newfound knowledge about their illustrious ancestors. Creating a narrative where the first 7 years of their lives were some sort of unfortunate detour from their rightful place in the Montgomery dynasty. I know, Asher agreed, his expression troubled, and it's affecting them differently. Zoe seems to enjoy the stories and experiences, but maintains a healthy skepticism. Leo is embracing it wholeheartedly, Freya completed his thought. He's always been more insecure about his identity, more questioning of his place in the world. Your mother is offering him certainty, a ready-made self-concept complete with centuries of validation. They were sitting on their back deck overlooking the Sound, the sun setting in a spectacular display of orange and pink that neither was fully appreciating given their concerns. In the 5 years since becoming a family, They had developed the habit of these evening conversations, checking in with each other about parenting challenges, work developments, and their evolving relationship. That relationship had deepened gradually but steadily over the years. The separate bedrooms of the early arrangement had eventually given way to a shared master suite. The careful co-parenting boundaries had softened into a natural partnership where decisions were made together with such instinctive harmony that the twins often complained they couldn't play one parent against the other. Professionally, they had both thrived. Asher had continued to lead Horizon Technologies to new heights while restructuring the company to allow him the family time he prioritized. Freya had returned to software engineering with remarkable success, eventually founding her own cybersecurity firm that specialized in protecting sensitive medical data, a niche inspired by the twins' early health monitoring for their inherited condition. They had built a life together that balanced individual achievement with family connection, professional success with personal fulfillment. And now Edith Montgomery had arrived to challenge the very foundations of that carefully constructed balance. We need to set clearer boundaries, Asher decided, reaching for Freya's hand. I've been too passive, hoping my mother would naturally integrate into our existing family structure. But that's not her way. She doesn't adapt to circumstances. She reshapes them to her preferences. Like someone else I know, Freya observed with a small smile, squeezing his fingers. The Montgomery determination runs deep. All the more reason to channel it constructively, Asher acknowledged. I'll speak with her tomorrow, establish some ground rules about frequency of visits, advance notice, and most importantly, respecting our parenting decisions. Do you think she'll listen? Probably not, Asher admitted with a rueful smile. But at least we'll have been clear about our expectations. After that, we can respond to violations from a position of having stated our boundaries explicitly. Freya nodded, appreciating his strategic approach while harboring doubts about its effectiveness. Edith Montgomery was not a woman accustomed to following others' rules or respecting boundaries that conflicted with her objectives. The following morning, those doubts proved well-founded when Leo approached them at breakfast with an expression of barely contained excitement. Grandmother has invited me to spend 2 weeks at the Montgomery estate in Boston, he announced, sliding a formal invitation across the table. It's the original family home, built in 1842. She says I should see where our family began, connect with my heritage directly. Freya and Asher exchanged alarmed glances, both immediately recognizing the calculated escalation of Edith's influence campaign. 2 weeks in Boston, surrounded exclusively by Montgomery history and perspectives, could undo months of careful parenting. That's a very generous invitation, Freya said carefully, picking up the heavy cream cardstock embossed with the Montgomery family crest. But summer has just started, and we already have family plans. What plans? Leo challenged, his expression darkening. We always just stay around Seattle. Grandmother says the Boston estate has its own beach access, a library with thousands of books, and original journals from our ancestors going back 5 generations. It sounds amazing, Asher acknowledged, but your mother's right. We need to discuss any major trips as a family first, not through individual invitations. This is about family, Leo insisted, his voice rising. My family history, which I've barely had a chance to learn about because you kept it from me for 12 years. Leo, Freya's tone held a warning. That's not a fair characterization, and you know it, isn't it? The challenge in his young voice was unmistakable. You didn't tell Dad about us for 7 years. Then you kept us from meeting our grandparents. Now you don't want me to visit our family's historic home. It's like you're determined to keep me from knowing half of who I am. That's enough, Asher said firmly. We understand your interest in the Montgomery history, but decisions about extended trips are made by your mother and me together, not by your grandmother unilaterally. You just don't want me to know them, Leo muttered, pushing away from the table. Because then I might realize how much I missed out on. As he stormed from the kitchen, Zoe looked up from her breakfast with concerned eyes. He's been reading grandfather's business journals every night, she reported quietly. And grandmother keeps telling him he has the Montgomery business acumen and should be preparing to carry on the legacy. And what has she been telling you? Freya asked gently. Zoe shrugged. That I have great-grandmother's artistic talent and social grace. But I told her I want to be a software engineer like you, and she got this weird pinched look on her face. Despite the tension of the moment, Freya couldn't help but smile at her daughter's description. Not part of the approved Montgomery career path for young ladies, I take it? Apparently not. Zoe agreed with a roll of her eyes. She started talking about art history degrees from Smith and serving on museum boards instead. After Zoe left to get ready for her summer dance program, Asher shook his head in frustration. My mother hasn't changed at all, still categorizing people according to her rigid view of appropriate paths and contributions. Leo is particularly vulnerable to her approach, Freya observed worriedly. He's always been more concerned with achievement and validation than Zoe. More like you were at his age, from what you've described. Which is exactly why I need to speak with my mother immediately, Asher said, reaching for his phone. Before this situation escalates further. The meeting with Edith was arranged for that afternoon at her Madison Park mansion, a sprawling colonial revival on the lakefront that screamed old money despite being her West Coast residence. Asher insisted on going alone, arguing that his mother would be more receptive to boundaries set by her son than those presented as a united parental front. She already sees you as the obstacle, he explained to Freya. If we go together, she'll focus all her resistance on you rather than hearing my concerns. While Asher confronted his mother, Freya faced a challenge of her own when she found Leo in his room, methodically packing a suitcase. What are you doing? She asked from the doorway, though the answer was obvious. Getting ready for Boston, he replied without looking up. Grandmother already bought the tickets. We leave on Sunday. Leo, your father and I haven't agreed to that trip, Freya reminded him gently. And making travel plans without discussing it with us first isn't acceptable. Why not? He finally turned to face her, his expression a mixture of defiance and hurt that pierced her heart. Why shouldn't I get to know my family? Learn about where I come from. You know where you come from, Freya countered. You've grown up in a loving home with parents who support your interests and encourage your growth. Half my life, Leo corrected. For the first 7 years, I only had you. And don't get me wrong, Mom, you were great. But don't you understand? There's this whole other part of me I'm just discovering. This history and legacy I knew nothing about. Don't I deserve to explore that? The genuine pain in his voice made Freya reconsider her approach. This wasn't just preteen rebellion or manipulation by Edith. This was her son genuinely struggling to integrate the different aspects of his identity, to make sense of the complex circumstances of his early life. Come sit with me, she invited, moving to perch on the edge of his bed. After a moment's hesitation, Leo joined her, though he maintained a physical and emotional distance that hadn't existed between them a few months earlier. When I found out I was pregnant with you and Zoe, Freya began carefully, I was terrified and alone. My mother had died the year before. My career was in shambles. The man I loved appeared to have abandoned me without explanation. Dad, Leo clarified, his tone softening slightly at the vulnerability in her voice. Yes, your father, Freya confirmed. I didn't know then what we later discovered, about Griffin intercepting my messages, about the deliberate effort to keep us apart. All I knew was that I was suddenly responsible for 2 lives growing inside me, with no support system and no clear path forward. So you decided to keep us from Dad, Leo filled in, his tone making clear he still didn't fully accept this justification. I tried to tell him, Freya corrected gently. Multiple times, through every channel I could think of. When those attempts were blocked, yes, I made the decision to raise you and Zoe on my own rather than continuing to fight against what seemed like his clear wish to move on without me. But that was his business partner, not him, Leo pointed out. Why didn't you try again later, when we were babies? Or toddlers? Why 7 years, Mom? The directness of the question, the genuine need to understand in her son's eyes, deserved complete honesty. Part of it was practical, Freya admitted. I was struggling to finish my education, to build a career that could support us, to be both mother and father to 2 active children. The daily demands left little energy for reopening painful wounds. She took a deep breath before continuing to the harder truth. But part of it was pride, and yes, fear. The longer time passed, the more daunting the prospect of contacting your father became. What if he rejected you? What if he fought for custody? What if he offered financial support that came with controlling conditions? Every scenario seemed to threaten the stable, loving home I was working so hard to create for you both. So you decided for us, Leo said, but his tone held more sadness than accusation now. You decided we didn't need a father. I decided to protect you the best way I knew how, Freya corrected gently. With the information I had at the time. Was it the perfect decision? No. Looking back now, knowing what I know about your father, about the kind of parent he would have been from the beginning, I would have pushed harder to reach him, fought through the barriers Griffin created. She reached for her son's hand, relieved when he didn't pull away. But Leo, I need you to understand something important. The circumstances of your early years, growing up without your father, without knowledge of the Montgomery family, weren't because you weren't loved or valued enough. They were because I loved you too much to risk what we had on what seemed like a dangerous gamble. Leo absorbed this, his thoughtful expression so like Asher's that it made Freya's heart ache. I get that, Mom. I do. But now that I know about the Montgomerys, about this whole history that's part of me, don't you see why it's important that I learn about it directly? Not just from stories or photographs, but by actually experiencing the places and traditions. I do see that, Freya acknowledged. And your father and I both want you to know your heritage. We just want that exploration to happen as part of our family's shared experience, not as some separate Montgomery indoctrination program. Indoctrination, Leo repeated, offense clear in his voice. Grandmother just wants me to understand my legacy. Your grandmother has very specific ideas about what the Montgomery legacy means and how it should shape your future, Freya replied carefully. Ideas that may not align with the values your father and I have tried to instill, or with your own unique gifts and interests. You don't even know her, Leo protested. I met her 13 years ago, Freya reminded him gently, when your father and I were first together. She made it very clear then that I wasn't the right kind of person to be associated with the Montgomery name, not from the right background, not with the right connections or education. She's different now, Leo insisted, though doubt flickered in his eyes. She says she regrets not knowing us from the beginning. I hope that's true, Freya said sincerely. But people rarely change fundamentally, Leo. They may adapt their tactics when previous approaches fail, but their core values and priorities typically remain consistent. Leo fell silent, processing this perspective. Finally, he asked in a smaller voice, so I can't go to Boston? Not for 2 weeks, not right now, Freya confirmed gently. But your father and I will discuss the possibility of a shorter family trip later in the summer, all of us together, including Zoe. So you can explore your Montgomery heritage with the context and support of the people who know and love you best. It wasn't the answer Leo wanted, but Freya could see him recognizing it as a reasonable compromise. The conversation hadn't resolved all his questions or healed the growing rift between them, but it had perhaps created a bridge of understanding that might eventually lead back to the close relationship they had always shared. Across the city, Asher's conversation with his mother was proceeding with considerably less progress toward mutual understanding. This is absurd, Edith declared, setting down her teacup with a sharp click against its saucer. They were seated in her formal parlor, surrounded by antiques and artwork that had been shipped from the Boston estate. Denying Leo the opportunity to connect with his heritage is exactly the kind of short-sighted parenting decision I would expect from that woman. That woman, Asher repeated coldly, is my partner and the mother of my children, and her name is Freya. Yes, well, Edith waved a dismissive hand. Whatever you call your current arrangement, the fact remains that the children are Montgomerys by blood. They deserve to know their history, their legacy, their rightful place in society. They know they're loved, Asher countered. They know they're valued for who they are, not for what family they were born into or what achievements might bring status and recognition. That's the legacy their mother and I have prioritized. How very contemporary of you, Edith said with thinly veiled disdain. But bloodlines matter, Asher. Heritage matters. These children have been raised without the advantages and connections that should have been their birthright. They've been raised with security, consistency, and unconditional love, Asher replied firmly. Everything I lacked growing up in the Montgomery legacy you're so eager to impose on them. A flash of genuine hurt crossed Edith's aristocratic features before her composure returned. We provided you with every advantage, every opportunity. The finest schools, the best connections, a place in society most people can only dream of accessing. And the constant message that I was never quite good enough, Asher added. That achievement was the only measure of worth. That appearances mattered more than authentic happiness. That's the Montgomery legacy as I experienced it, Mother. Is it any wonder I'm hesitant to expose my children to the same pressures? Your father was hard on you because he saw your potential, Edith insisted. He wanted you to reach the heights you were capable of achieving. No, Asher shook his head firmly. He wanted me to fulfill his vision of the Montgomery heir, regardless of my own interests or talents. And now you're attempting the same manipulation with Leo and Zoe. I am offering them opportunities, Edith corrected indignantly. Connections to their past, understanding of the legacy they represent. You're offering Leo a predetermined identity, Asher countered. A script for who he should be based on a family history that frankly contains as much to regret as to celebrate. What are you talking about? Edith's voice sharpened with alarm. The Montgomery name has always stood for excellence and achievement. And rigid adherence to social hierarchies, Asher added. And questionable business practices during the railroad expansion. And strategic marriages designed to consolidate wealth rather than promote happiness. I've read the family archives too, Mother, including the journals grandfather kept locked in his private study. Color drained from Edith's face. Those records were meant to remain private. Family matters not for public consumption. Exactly, Asher agreed grimly. Because the true Montgomery legacy includes as much self-interest and cold calculation as it does philanthropy and achievement. It's a complex, human story, not the sanitized version of aristocratic benevolence you're presenting to my children. You've always been determined to see the worst in your heritage, Edith accused. To reject the advantages and responsibilities that come with being a Montgomery. I've been determined to define my own path, Asher corrected. To measure success by more meaningful metrics than wealth accumulation or social status. And that's what I want for my children, the freedom to discover their own values and priorities, not have them dictated by family tradition. And yet, Edith observed with cutting precision, you've kept them isolated from half their family history until now. Is that the freedom of choice you claim to value so highly? The observation struck uncomfortably close to Asher's own doubts about their handling of the Montgomery connection. Had they been right to maintain such distance from his family of origin? Or had they, with the best of intentions, created the very vacuum of knowledge that Edith was now filling with her selective narrative? We've explained their heritage in age-appropriate ways, he defended, though with less certainty than before. And we've been open to increasing their knowledge as they've grown old enough to process more complex family dynamics. Age-appropriate, Edith echoed skeptically. How convenient. Always some reason to delay, to filter, to control the narrative. As opposed to your approach of overwhelming a 12-year-old with grand narratives of dynasty and destiny. Asher challenged. Leo is a child, Mother. A brilliant, sensitive child trying to understand his place in the world. He doesn't need the weight of Montgomery expectations crushing his natural development and curiosity. He needs to understand his potential, Edith insisted. The opportunities his name and connections can provide. The responsibilities that come with privilege. On that last point, at least, we agree, Asher acknowledged. Though I suspect our definitions of those responsibilities differ significantly. Edith studied her son with calculating eyes. You've changed, Asher. This woman has changed you. Freya, Asher corrected again. And yes, loving her, building a family with her, has changed me, for the better. She's helped me see that true success isn't measured in acquisitions or accolades, but in the quality of our connections and the integrity of our choices. How charmingly philosophical, Edith said dismissively. I wonder if you'll maintain such elevated principles when Leo begins to question why he was denied knowledge of his heritage for so many years. Children can be quite unforgiving when they discover they've been kept from information that shapes their very identity. The thinly veiled threat hung in the air between them. Edith's clear intention to continue nurturing Leo's curiosity about his Montgomery roots, regardless of the parental boundaries Asher was attempting to establish. This discussion isn't over, Asher said as he stood to leave. But I want to be absolutely clear. Any future interaction with Leo and Zoe happens with our knowledge and approval. No more unilateral invitations, no more gifts with strings attached, no more undermining our parenting decisions. They're my grandchildren, Edith stated as if this fact alone granted her special rights. The only continuation of the Montgomery line now that your father is gone. They're children, Asher corrected firmly. Individual human beings with their own unique potential and path, not vessels for your dynastic ambitions or replacements for the control you've lost over me. As he drove home from his mother's mansion, Asher couldn't shake the sense that the confrontation had accomplished little beyond clarifying the battle lines. Edith Montgomery had spent a lifetime navigating family power dynamics. She wouldn't be easily deterred from her mission to claim her grandchildren for the Montgomery legacy, as she defined it. The following week brought an escalation that neither Asher nor Freya had anticipated. While Zoe remained largely unaffected by Edith's influence campaign, Leo's behavior grew increasingly concerning. He began referring to himself as Leo Montgomery rather than Leo Larson. He spent hours researching elite preparatory schools on the East Coast. Most alarmingly, he started questioning Freya's decisions and authority with unprecedented defiance. "Why should I have to attend coding camp?" he challenged when reminded of his summer program registration. "The Montgomerys are business leaders and financiers, not tech workers." "Tech workers?" Freya repeated, stunned by both the sentiment and the dismissive tone. "Leo, your father founded one of the most successful technology companies in the world, and I run my own cybersecurity firm. Technology is very much part of both your family heritages. But the Montgomery legacy goes back centuries," Leo countered. "Grandmother says focusing too much on current trends risks losing connection with the deeper family traditions of leadership and financial stewardship." The parroted phrasing made clear just how deeply Edith's perspective was influencing him. Before Freya could formulate a response that wouldn't further alienate her increasingly distant son, Zoe interjected from across the kitchen where she'd been quietly observing the exchange. "That's stupid," she said bluntly. "Why would some dead relative's jobs matter more than what you're actually interested in? You love coding. You've been building programs since you were 8. It's about responsibility to family legacy," Leo informed his twin with newfound superiority. "Something you'd understand if you paid attention to grandmother's lessons instead of just looking at the old photographs." "I pay attention," Zoe countered. "I just don't automatically believe everything she says, especially when it contradicts what I know from actual experience." "What's that supposed to mean?" Leo demanded. "It means grandmother talks about the Montgomerys like they were perfect royalty who never made mistakes," Zoe explained with her characteristic directness. "But real families aren't like that. They're messy and complicated. Look at how grandmother treated mom when she and dad were first together, like she wasn't good enough because her parents weren't rich. Does that sound like someone whose judgment we should trust completely?" Leo had no immediate response to this surprisingly mature observation from his twin. Freya used the opening to gentle the conversation back toward common ground. "Leo, your interest in your Montgomery heritage is natural and valid," she acknowledged. "But Zoe makes a good point about not idealizing any family narrative. Every family has its strengths and weaknesses, its triumphs and failures. The Montgomery history is part of you, but it doesn't define you or determine your future path. Grandmother says the Montgomery name comes with responsibilities," Leo insisted, though with less certainty than before. "Expectations about continuing the family traditions." "And what about the Larson name?" Freya asked quietly. "What about the traditions of hard work, integrity, and finding joy in creating things that help others? Those values shaped your early years just as significantly as any Montgomery heritage." A flash of guilt crossed Leo's features, quickly replaced by the defensive mask he'd worn increasingly often in recent weeks. "I didn't mean that the Larson side doesn't matter," he muttered. "Just that the Montgomery history is more documented, more significant in terms of impact. Impact isn't measured only in wealth or social prominence," Freya reminded him gently. "My father was a high school science teacher who inspired hundreds of students to pursue STEM careers. My mother was a nurse who comforted people during their most vulnerable moments. Their impact may not be recorded in history books or family crests, but it mattered profoundly to the lives they touched." Leo absorbed this perspective, his expression thoughtful despite his continued resistance. Before the conversation could develop further, Asher arrived home, his expression grave as he entered the kitchen. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. "All of us. Family council in the living room, 5 minutes." The serious tone caught everyone's attention. Leo and Zoe exchanged concerned glances, their earlier disagreement momentarily forgotten in the face of their father's obvious tension. Once they were all seated in the living room, Asher revealed the cause of his concern. "I've just discovered that applications have been submitted in both your names to Lakeside School for the fall," he informed the twins, "along with preliminary paperwork for Phillips Exeter Academy as a potential future boarding school option." "What?" Freya's shock mirrored the twins' confused expressions. "Who submitted those applications?" "My mother," Asher confirmed grimly. Using her status as grandmother and the Montgomery family's historic connection to these institutions to initiate the admissions process without our knowledge or consent. "But we're already enrolled at Cascadia Academy for next year," Zoe protested. "My friends are there, and they have the advanced science program Leo and I wanted." "Exactly," Asher agreed. "Which is why I've contacted both schools to withdraw the unauthorized applications and make it clear that any future communication about our children's education must come directly through Freya and me." Leo's expression had grown increasingly troubled during this revelation. "Did grandmother really apply to schools for us without telling you?" he asked, his voice smaller than it had been in weeks. "Yes," Asher confirmed, his tone gentling as he addressed his son. "And while I understand her desire to provide what she considers the best opportunities, circumventing your parents' authority this way was completely inappropriate. But she said you'd probably agree once you saw the school's programs," Leo said, revealing more of his grandmother's behind-the-scenes manipulation. "That you were just resistant to change because of pride." Asher's expression darkened at this insight into his mother's tactics. "This isn't about pride, Leo. It's about making careful, thoughtful decisions about your education based on your individual needs and interests, not based on which schools have historic connections to the Montgomery family." "She also said Exeter would prepare me properly for Harvard Business School," Leo added, his voice now uncertain. "That it's never too early to start building the right path." "The right path according to whom?" Freya asked gently. "The right path is the one that nurtures your natural talents and interests, Leo, not one predetermined by family tradition." "I don't want to go to boarding school," Zoe stated firmly. "And I definitely don't want to go to Harvard Business School. I want to study computer science at MIT, like Mom was going to before we were born." The simple declaration of her own clear preferences highlighted the contrast with Leo's increasingly conflicted sense of identity and direction. Watching her son struggle with the competing narratives of his heritage, Freya made a decision. "I think it's time we all visited the Montgomery estate in Boston," she said, surprising everyone in the room, including herself. "Not just Leo, but all of us together. To see firsthand this history that's become so important, but with the context and perspective our family can provide." "Really?" Leo's expression brightened with genuine hope for the first time in weeks. "Yes," Freya confirmed. "But as a family exploration, not as the Montgomery indoctrination program your grandmother envisioned. A chance for you and Zoe to connect with that part of your heritage while maintaining the grounding of our family unit." "I think that's an excellent idea," Asher agreed, understanding the strategic shift in approach. Rather than continuing to oppose Edith's influence campaign directly, which only made her messages more appealing to Leo's adolescent desire for independence, they would engage with the Montgomery history on their own terms, providing context and balance to Edith's selective narrative. "When can we go?" Leo asked eagerly. "Next week," Asher decided. "I'll make the arrangements. Though we should be prepared for my mother to be disappointed that her original plan has been modified." "Will she be there?" Zoe asked, less enthused about this aspect of the proposed trip. "Probably," Asher acknowledged. "It is her home when she's not in Seattle. But this will be our family trip, with our agenda and priorities, not hers." The twins soon departed to share the news with friends, Leo clearly excited, Zoe more cautiously optimistic about the unexpected travel plans. Once they were alone, Freya turned to Asher with concern. "Are we making the right choice? Bringing them directly into the heart of Montgomery territory could backfire, especially with Leo's current vulnerability to your mother's influence." "I think it's our best option," Asher replied thoughtfully. "Continuing to restrict access only makes the Montgomery legacy more mythical and appealing to Leo. Better to demystify it, to show them the reality, both the impressive achievements and the uncomfortable truths, with our guidance and perspective." "And your mother?" How will she react to this change in plans? She'll adapt, Asher predicted. Present it as a victory that we're bringing the children to the family estate at all, while continuing her influence campaign in more subtle ways. But at least we'll be there to provide counter-narrative and context. I hope you're right, Freya said, leaning into his embrace. Because I feel like we're in danger of losing Leo to a version of himself that exists only in your mother's dynastic imagination. We won't lose him, Asher promised, though concern shadowed his features. The connection you've built with both twins is too strong, too authentic to be permanently undermined by my mother's manipulations. This is adolescent identity exploration, complicated by the timing of her arrival in their lives. But the core values you've instilled over 12 years of loving, consistent parenting run deeper than her recent influence. Freya wished she could share his confidence, but the growing distance in Leo's eyes when he looked at her told a different story, one of increasing doubt and resentment that threatened the close bond they had always shared. True to Asher's prediction, Edith Montgomery adapted swiftly to the change in plans, presenting the family visit as if it had been her intention all along. The arrangements were made with typical Montgomery efficiency, the private jet scheduled, the estate staff notified, the itinerary planned to showcase the family's historic prominence in Boston society. The estate itself proved even more imposing than Freya had imagined. Situated on 10 manicured acres in Brookline, the Georgian Revival mansion dated from the 1870s, when the third generation of American Montgomerys had consolidated their railroad wealth into more respectable pursuits like banking and property development. With its columned entrance, formal gardens, and west wing dedicated entirely to entertaining, it embodied the grandeur and privilege that had shaped Asher's childhood. "This is where you grew up?" Zoe asked her father as they stood in the soaring entryway, her voice echoing slightly in the marble-floored space. "It's like a museum." "It felt like one too," Asher admitted quietly. "Look, but don't touch. Appearance always over comfort. Perfection expected in all things." "It's magnificent," Leo breathed, taking in the ancestral portraits lining the grand staircase. Each Montgomery patriarch and his wife captured in oils with the same stern dignity across generations. "It's certainly impressive," Freya acknowledged, watching her son's rapt expression with concern. The splendor of the estate was having exactly the effect Edith had likely anticipated, reinforcing the narrative of Montgomery exceptionalism and heritage that had so captivated Leo in recent weeks. Edith herself descended the staircase with practiced grace, her expression one of cultivated welcome that didn't quite reach her eyes when they rested on Freya. "At last, the children see their rightful family home," she declared, embracing Leo with particular warmth before offering Zoe a more restrained greeting. "Welcome to Montgomery House. Generations of your ancestors have walked these halls, shaping American industry and society from this very estate." "It's beautiful, grandmother," Leo said earnestly. "Just like you described. And significantly larger than anyone needs for actual living," Zoe added with her characteristic directness. "How many bathrooms are there?" 12. Edith replied stiffly, clearly disapproving of the practical question. The estate was designed for both family living and appropriate entertainment of business associates and social connections. 12 bathrooms, Zoe repeated with a low whistle. "That's a lot of toilets to clean." "Zoe," Asher murmured, though Freya caught the hint of amusement beneath his mild reproach. His daughter's practical assessment of the mansion's excesses reflected his own evolving perspective on the wealth and privilege he had once taken for granted. "The staff handles such matters," Edith informed Zoe coolly, "as they have for generations. Now, I've planned a full itinerary for your visit, beginning with a tour of the family portrait gallery where you can see the Montgomery lineage from our arrival in America in 1772 through the present day." "Actually, Mother," Asher interjected smoothly, "we'd like some time to settle in first. The children are tired from the flight, and we have our own plans for exploring the estate and surrounding area." Edith's displeasure at this deviation from her carefully orchestrated schedule was evident, but she recovered quickly. "Of course. Your old rooms have been prepared for you, and, Ms. Larson, the children will be in the East Wing guest suites, traditionally reserved for younger family members visiting from other branches of the Montgomery line." The subtle emphasis on traditionally and the hesitation before Freya's name communicated volumes about Edith's continued resistance to accepting their family structure on its own terms. Even here, in the heart of Montgomery territory, she was determined to maintain the narrative of proper family order and hierarchy. After settling into their rooms, Asher and Freya deliberately choosing to share the master suite rather than conform to Edith's obvious preference for separate accommodations, they gathered the twins for a private family conversation before dinner. "This house, this legacy you're seeing," Asher began carefully, "is part of your heritage, but it's important to understand it in context. The Montgomery wealth came from various sources over generations: shipping during the early 19th century, railroads during the expansion west, banking, and property development later. Some of these ventures created genuine value. Others exploited workers or manipulated markets for personal gain." "What do you mean?" Leo asked, his brow furrowing at this more nuanced picture than Edith had presented. "I mean that family histories are rarely as simple or uniformly admirable as they might be presented," Asher explained. "Your great-great-grandfather made much of his fortune by acquiring railroad rights through political connections and questionable land deals. Your great-grandfather expanded the family banking interests by foreclosing on family farms during the Depression. But grandmother said the Montgomerys have always been philanthropists and community leaders," Leo protested, clearly struggling to reconcile these conflicting narratives. "Many were, particularly the Montgomery women," Asher acknowledged. "The family has funded hospitals, universities, and cultural institutions. But often these public acts of generosity coexisted with private business practices that were less admirable. Like most families and most people," Freya added gently. "Complex mixtures of admirable qualities and human failings. The danger lies in either completely idealizing or entirely dismissing your heritage, rather than understanding it with nuance and perspective." Leo seemed troubled by these revelations, while Zoe nodded with unsurprised acceptance. "That makes more sense than grandmother's perfect dynasty story," she observed. "Real history is always messier than the official version." "Exactly," Asher confirmed, pleased by his daughter's insight. "Which is why tomorrow, I want to show you parts of the Montgomery history that aren't included in my mother's usual tour, including the family archives in the library basement, where the more complicated aspects of our past are documented." "Won't grandmother object?" Leo asked, his loyalty clearly divided. "Probably," Asher acknowledged with a slight smile. "But some privileges of being a Montgomery might as well serve a constructive purpose, including the right to access family records that technically belong equally to all direct descendants." The following morning, after a formal breakfast during which Edith detailed her plans for the day, plans that notably excluded any exploration of the family archives, Asher orchestrated a strategic division of activities. "Mother, why don't you take Zoe to the Gardner Museum as you suggested? She's always been interested in art history, and your knowledge of the collections would provide valuable context." This flattering appeal to Edith's social expertise, combined with the opportunity to influence at least one of her grandchildren, proved an effective distraction. "What a lovely idea," Edith agreed, clearly pleased by the prospect of one-on-one time with her granddaughter. Zoe's artistic sensibility deserves proper cultivation. Zoe caught her father's eye, understanding her role in this diversion tactic and willing to play along despite her greater interest in technology than art. "I'd like that, grandmother. You can show me the famous paintings you mentioned." "Excellent. And what will the rest of you be doing?" Edith inquired, her tone casual though her gaze was sharp with suspicion. "I thought Leo might enjoy seeing Harvard's campus," Asher replied smoothly, "since he's expressed interest in the business school tradition." This explanation satisfied Edith's expectations for appropriate Montgomery aspirations, and she departed with Zoe, leaving Asher, Freya, and Leo free to access the family archives without interference. The Montgomery family library occupied the entire west wing of the mansion's ground floor, its two-story walls lined with leather-bound volumes collected over generations. But it was the basement level that held the true family history, row upon row of filing cabinets and storage boxes containing business records, personal correspondence, legal documents, and private journals dating back to the family's arrival in America. Few people outside the immediate family have ever accessed these archives. Asher explained as he unlocked the heavy oak door that led to the basement stairs. My father was particularly protective of the family's private records, concerned about how certain historical business practices might be judged by modern standards. You mean like the railroad land acquisitions you mentioned? Leo asked, his curiosity clearly piqued despite his recent resistance to perspectives that contradicted Edith's narrative. Among other things, Asher confirmed. The archives contain the unvarnished Montgomery history, business records that detail exactly how the family fortune was built, correspondence that reveals the private attitudes behind public personas, journals that document the personal costs of maintaining the Montgomery legacy. The basement archive was cool and dry, preserved with the same care as the more publicly displayed aspects of Montgomery heritage. Asher navigated the organized rows with the familiarity of someone who had spent significant time exploring these records. I discovered this place when I was about your age, he told Leo. I was searching for. He paused, considering how to explain his adolescent quest. I was searching for answers about who I was supposed to be. My father had very specific expectations for me as the Montgomery heir, and I was trying to understand if there was room for my own interests and identity within that predetermined path. Did you find answers? Leo asked quietly, the parallel to his own current struggle evident in his voice. I found perspective, Asher replied. I discovered that behind the carefully maintained facade of Montgomery perfection were generations of real human beings, some admirable, some deeply flawed, most a complex mixture of both. People who struggled with the expectations placed on them, who sometimes rebelled and sometimes conformed, who made choices that affected not just their own lives, but the lives of those who came after them. He pulled a leather-bound journal from a shelf labeled J.W. Montgomery 1892 to 1897 and handed it to Leo. Your great-great-grandfather, the railroad baron who expanded the family fortune exponentially during the Gilded Age. His public reputation was as a philanthropist and civic leader. His private journals tell a different story. Leo carefully opened the aging volume, his natural reverence for books evident in his gentle handling of the fragile pages. As he began to read, his expression shifted from curiosity to surprise, and then to troubled understanding. He writes about bribing legislators to secure land grants, Leo said, looking up with disillusionment clear in his eyes. And about breaking strikes by hiring men to attack the workers. Yes, Asher confirmed. The Montgomery fortune wasn't built entirely through innovation and honest industry, despite what the family mythology suggests. There were ethical compromises, exploitation of workers and resources, manipulation of political systems for private gain. Why are you showing me this? Leo asked, his voice small. If this is my heritage, why would you want me to know about it? Because understanding the complete truth of your history, both the admirable achievements and the moral failures, gives you the freedom to choose what aspects of that heritage you want to carry forward, Asher explained. The Montgomery name doesn't have to define you or determine your path. It's one part of who you are, not the entire blueprint for who you must become. Freya stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on her son's shoulder. Every family has complicated histories, Leo. What matters isn't the past we inherit, but the future we choose to create from it. Leo absorbed this, his thoughtful expression suggesting internal recalibration of the Montgomery mythology he had so eagerly embraced in recent weeks. Does grandmother know about all this? He asked finally. She knows, Asher confirmed. But she's chosen to focus on a more selective, idealized version of the family history. One that reinforces her beliefs about Montgomery exceptionalism and obligation. Is that why you left? Leo asked perceptively. Why you chose technology instead of the family businesses? Partly, Asher acknowledged. I wanted to build something that created genuine value, that solved real problems, rather than merely perpetuating wealth and status for their own sake. But mostly, I left because I needed the freedom to define success on my own terms, not according to predetermined Montgomery expectations. He selected another volume from a different section of the archives, this one newer and bound in dark blue leather. My father's private journals from the period when I started my first company. I found these after his death, when I was helping my mother organize his papers. Leo hesitated before accepting this more personal family record. Are you sure I should read this? It seems very private. I want you to see how the Montgomery legacy has affected real people, including your grandfather's perspective on me and my choices, Asher explained. It's important context for understanding the family dynamics you're now experiencing. As Leo carefully opened the journal to the bookmarked page, Freya moved closer to Asher, providing silent support for what she knew was a painful sharing of his own complicated family history. The journal entry was dated shortly after Asher had secured his first round of funding for the startup that would eventually become Horizon Technologies. Leo read aloud. Asher continues his foolish pursuit of digital security protocols, despite my advice to join Harrison at the investment firm. His stubbornness will be his downfall. The Montgomery name should be associated with established, respectable enterprises, not speculative technology ventures that will likely fail within the year. I've made it clear that failure will not be met with financial rescue. He must learn that actions have consequences, and betraying family tradition carries a price. He looked up, clearly shocked by the coldness of his grandfather's assessment. He wanted you to fail? His own son. He wanted me to conform, Asher corrected gently. To follow the path he believed was right for the Montgomery heir. When I chose differently, he saw it as rejection of everything he valued, the traditions and expectations that had shaped his own life. That's messed up, Leo said bluntly. Parents should support their kids' dreams, not try to force them into some predetermined mold. Yes, Freya agreed softly. They should. Which is why your father and I have always encouraged your interests and talents, whether they aligned with our own careers or took you in completely different directions. The pointed contrast between the parenting philosophy Leo had experienced throughout his life and the rigid Montgomery expectations documented in the archives wasn't lost on him. For several moments, he stood silently, processing this new perspective on the family legacy he had recently embraced with such enthusiasm. There's more, Asher said, guiding them to another section of the archives. Letters between my father and mother during the period when I first met your mother. Their private correspondence about whether Freya Larson was suitable for association with the Montgomery name. Leo's expression darkened. They didn't approve of Mom. They believed the Montgomery heir should marry someone from a similar background, preferably from another established family with comparable wealth and social position, Asher explained. Your mother's parents were teachers. She attended MIT on scholarship rather than family money. By Montgomery standards, these were disqualifying factors, regardless of her intelligence, character, or the fact that I loved her. That's ridiculous, Leo declared with sudden vehemence. Mom is brilliant. She runs her own company. She's presented at international security conferences. Any family would be lucky to have her. I agree completely, Asher said with a warm smile at Freya. But the Montgomery perspective has traditionally valued certain kinds of achievement and background over others. Social connections over personal character, established wealth over earned success, conformity to tradition over individual passion and talent. Is that why grandmother keeps talking about proper schools and appropriate career paths? Leo asked, making connections between the historical documents and his own recent experiences. Because she thinks there's only one right way to be a Montgomery? Exactly, Asher confirmed. And while I understand her perspective is shaped by her own upbringing and experiences, I fundamentally disagree with her approach. Which is why your mother and I have raised you and Zoe with different values, emphasizing personal integrity over social status, genuine interests over prescribed paths, individual character over family reputation. Leo absorbed this, his expression thoughtful as he carefully returned his grandfather's journal to its place on the shelf. I think I understand better now, he said finally. Why you were worried about grandmother's influence. Why you didn't want me spending 2 weeks here alone. We want you to know your heritage, Freya assured him, sensing a potential breakthrough in her son's recent emotional distance. But to know it completely, with all its complexities and contradictions, not just the carefully curated version your grandmother presents. And we want you to feel free to define your own identity, Asher added. To incorporate the aspects of your Montgomery heritage that resonate with your values while rejecting those that don't align with the person you want to become. Leo nodded slowly, his eyes moving across the vast archives that documented the unvarnished Montgomery history. There's so much here, good and bad. It's part of me, but it doesn't have to control me. Exactly, Freya confirmed, hope rising that her son was beginning to understand the nuanced relationship between heritage and personal identity that she and Asher had been trying to convey. Before they could continue the conversation, the sound of the basement door opening echoed through the archives. Edith's voice, tight with displeasure, called down the stairs. "Asher, are you down there? The museum tour ended early, and we've been looking everywhere for you." Footsteps on the wooden stairs announced Edith's arrival, with Zoe following close behind. When Edith saw the open archive boxes and journals spread across the research table, her expression hardened with unmistakable disapproval. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded. "These archives are private family records, not tourist attractions for casual browsing." "Leo is family," Asher reminded her calmly. "A direct Montgomery descendant with every right to understand his complete heritage, including the aspects you might prefer remained buried in the basement." "These are sensitive historical documents," Edith protested. "Not appropriate for children without proper context and guidance." "We were providing context," Freya interjected. "The kind that includes multiple perspectives and acknowledges the complexities of family history rather than presenting a sanitized version." "I suppose you've been highlighting the most unflattering aspects of Montgomery business practices," Edith accused, her gaze moving to the journals on the table. "Judging past generations by contemporary standards without understanding the different social contexts in which decisions were made." "Actually," Leo spoke up, surprising everyone with his direct engagement, "we've been reading about how different Montgomery generations define success and family obligation, about how those expectations affected their choices and relationships." He held up a journal. "Like how grandfather disapproved of dad's technology company and wanted him to fail so he'd conform to Montgomery traditions." Edith's expression tightened at this direct reference to her late husband's private writings. "Your grandfather had strong convictions about family responsibility and appropriate career paths, convictions that have been validated by the Montgomery success across generations. But Dad succeeded by following his own path," Leo pointed out reasonably. "Horizon Technologies is worth billions. Isn't that success by any definition?" "Financial achievement is only one measure of success," Edith countered. "Maintaining family traditions, upholding the Montgomery name and reputation, continuing established connections and influence, these are equally important aspects of true family legacy. Even when those traditions included things like breaking strikes and bribing politicians?" Leo asked innocently, referencing what he'd read in his great-great-grandfather's journals. Edith's face paled slightly. "Those were different times, with different ethical standards and business practices. It's unfair to judge historical figures by modern moral frameworks." "Maybe," Leo acknowledged. "But it's also important to know the complete truth about where our family money came from, isn't it? Not just the charity donations and museum wings, but how the fortune was built in the first place." The maturity and nuance in Leo's question, reflecting his rapid integration of the more complex Montgomery narrative he'd encountered in the archives, clearly caught Edith off guard. She had expected to mold an impressionable 12-year-old into her vision of the Montgomery heir. Instead, she was facing a thoughtful young person capable of questioning and evaluating the family mythology she had presented. "These matters are complicated," she said finally. "Best discussed when you're older and have more context for understanding business realities and family obligations." "That's what everyone keeps saying," Leo replied with a hint of his recent frustration. "That I'm too young to understand the complete truth or the full story. But I'm 12, not stupid. I can handle knowing that my family history includes both good and bad choices, both achievements to be proud of and mistakes to learn from." Zoe had remained uncharacteristically quiet during this exchange, but now she moved to stand beside her brother in silent solidarity. "We're old enough to know who we come from," she added. "All of it, not just the sanitized highlights reel." Edith looked genuinely taken aback by this united front from the twins, her carefully orchestrated narrative of Montgomery greatness challenged not just by Asher and Freya, but by the very grandchildren she had hoped to claim for that legacy. "I see you've all been quite busy reinterpreting family history," she said coldly. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion over lunch. The staff has prepared a formal dining service, as befits the Montgomery tradition of appropriate hospitality." As they followed Edith upstairs, Freya caught a meaningful glance between the twins, their silent communication conveying shared understanding and renewed connection despite Leo's recent emotional distance. Whatever impact the Montgomery archives had on her son's perspective, it seemed to have initiated a healing of the rift that had been growing between him and his family. The formal lunch in the grand dining room provided a stark counterpoint to the emotional revelations of the morning. Seated at a massive mahogany table that could accommodate 20 guests, surrounded by sterling silver place settings and crystal stemware, the family engaged in stilted conversation under Edith's watchful supervision. "I've taken the liberty of arranging several appointments for the children during your visit," Edith announced as the first course was served. "The headmaster of Milton Academy has agreed to provide a private tour tomorrow, and the directors of both the Boston Children's Hospital Board and the Montgomery Foundation have expressed interest in meeting the next generation." "That's very presumptuous, Mother," Asher replied calmly. "We have our own plans for the remainder of our visit, which don't include preparatory school tours or introduction to board positions the children are far too young to consider." "It's never too early to establish appropriate connections," Edith insisted, "particularly for Leo, as the male Montgomery heir. Certain doors are more easily opened when relationships are cultivated from an early age." "The male Montgomery heir?" Zoe repeated, arching an eyebrow in perfect imitation of her grandmother's own expression. "What about female Montgomery heirs? Or is the family legacy only for boys?" "Young ladies have their own important role in continuing family traditions," Edith replied smoothly, "primarily through suitable marriages and social leadership, managing charitable endeavors and cultural patronage." "Wow," Zoe said, not bothering to hide her disdain. "That's impressively archaic. You know women can be CEOs and scientists and basically anything now, right? It's not 1950 anymore." "Zoe," Asher murmured, though his expression suggested more amusement than disapproval at his daughter's blunt assessment. "Contemporary trends notwithstanding," Edith continued with dignity, "certain traditional roles have served family structures effectively for generations. The Montgomery legacy has always benefited from a clear distinction between male and female contributions." "Is that why you never had a career of your own?" Leo asked, his question reflecting genuine curiosity rather than challenge. "Because grandfather expected you to focus on social leadership instead of professional achievement?" Edith's composure faltered momentarily, a flicker of something like regret crossing her aristocratic features before her mask of Montgomery propriety returned. "My generation had different expectations for women's roles. I embraced my responsibilities as the wife of the Montgomery heir, maintaining our social position and family connections while raising your father to understand his place in the family legacy." "Did you ever want something different?" Zoe pressed, sensing the emotional undercurrent beneath her grandmother's practiced response. "Something that was just yours, not defined by being someone's wife or mother?" The directness of the question created an uncomfortable silence around the formal dining table. For a moment, it seemed Edith might refuse to answer or deflect with another reference to generational differences and family obligations. But something in Zoe's genuine interest appeared to breach her customary reserve. "I was accepted to Radcliffe College to study art history," she admitted, her voice softer than usual, "before I met your grandfather. My father considered higher education an acceptable accomplishment for a daughter, provided it led to appropriate cultural refinement rather than professional ambition." "What happened?" Leo asked when she paused. "I met Jameson Montgomery at a summer benefit in Newport. He was completing his MBA at Harvard, preparing to take his place in the family business. By Christmas we were engaged, and my college plans adjusted to accommodate the more immediate responsibilities of becoming a Montgomery wife." "You gave up your education," Freya observed quietly, seeing Edith in a new light through this personal revelation. "I made a choice," Edith corrected, though without her usual sharpness. "One that aligned with the values and expectations of my upbringing. The Montgomery name offered social position, financial security, and the opportunity to influence important institutions through board service and philanthropic direction. These were not insignificant compensations for a more conventional academic path. But was it what you wanted?" Zoe persisted, showing the emotional intelligence that often surprised adults who knew her primarily as a scientifically minded child. Edith regarded her granddaughter with an expression that mingled irritation and something like reluctant respect for her perceptiveness. "What I wanted was less relevant than what was expected," she said finally. "A reality that both you and your brother would do well to understand about certain levels of society and family obligation." "That's where we fundamentally disagree, Mother," Asher interjected. "Freya and I have raised Leo and Zoe to believe that their genuine interests and talents should guide their choices, not predetermined expectations based on gender or family name." "A charming philosophy," Edith said dismissively, "but one that ignores the responsibilities that come with privilege and heritage. The Montgomery name brings opportunities, but also obligations to maintain family traditions and social position." "Even if those traditions limited your own choices?" Freya asked quietly. "Even if they prevented you from pursuing your personal interests and talents?" A flash of genuine emotion, perhaps anger, perhaps long-suppressed regret, crossed Edith's face before her composure reasserted itself. Every family structure requires certain sacrifices for the greater good. Individual desires sometimes must be subordinated to collective legacy and obligation. "But that's exactly what drove Dad away," Leo pointed out with surprising insight. "Those expectations that put family legacy ahead of personal fulfillment. And look what happened. He built something amazing by following his own path instead of the one grandfather laid out for him." "Your father's technological success is undeniable," Edith acknowledged stiffly. "But it came at the cost of family cohesion and continuity. The Montgomery banking and investment interests have been managed by non-family executives since your grandfather's death, lacking the direct family leadership that sustained them for generations." "Maybe that's okay," Zoe suggested reasonably. "Maybe some traditions should evolve, or even end if they're not making people happy anymore." "Happiness," Edith repeated with faint disdain. "Such a contemporary obsession. Previous generations understood that purpose and duty often provide more meaningful satisfaction than the pursuit of personal happiness." "And yet," Asher observed, "your determination to mold Leo and Zoe into proper Montgomery heirs suggests you're not entirely satisfied with how your own adherence to duty and family obligation has turned out. If traditional Montgomery values truly provided superior fulfillment, you wouldn't need to recruit the next generation so aggressively to continue them." The observation struck with uncomfortable precision. Edith's expression tightened as she regarded her son across the formal table that symbolized so much of the Montgomery tradition she had devoted her life to preserving. "You've always been determined to see the worst in your heritage," she said, though with more weariness than anger. "To reject the advantages and responsibilities that come with your name and position." "Not reject," Asher corrected. "Redefine. To take what's valuable from our heritage, the commitment to excellence, the understanding of privileges' responsibilities, while leaving behind the rigid hierarchies and predetermined paths that stifled genuine growth and connection. A convenient rationalization for abandoning family traditions," Edith countered, though with less conviction than before. "Or a necessary evolution to preserve what truly matters about family legacy," Freya suggested. "The values and principles rather than the specific forms they've traditionally taken." The philosophical divide between them remained unbridged, but something in the quality of the conversation had shifted. The personal revelations, Edith's abandoned educational aspirations, the complex emotions beneath her devotion to Montgomery traditions, had humanized what had previously been presented as absolute and unquestionable family obligation. As the formal lunch concluded, Leo approached his grandmother with newfound confidence balanced by genuine respect. "I'd like to see more of the family archives," he said. "Not just the business records, but the personal histories too. I want to understand where I come from, all of it, not just the achievements but the struggles and mistakes too." Edith regarded her grandson with a mixture of resignation and reluctant pride in his determination. "The complete Montgomery history is complicated," she acknowledged. "Not all of it aligns with the public image we've maintained through generations." "I know," Leo said simply. "That's why I want to understand it. Not to judge or reject it, but to learn from it, both what to carry forward and what to leave behind." Something in his mature articulation of this balanced perspective seemed to reach Edith in a way that Asher and Freya's arguments had not. Perhaps it was hearing her own grandchild, The Montgomery heir she had been so determined to claim for the family legacy, expressed genuine interest in that heritage while maintaining thoughtful independence from its more rigid expectations. Very well, she conceded with surprising grace. This afternoon, we can explore more of the family records together. Though I maintain that certain context is necessary for proper understanding of historical decisions and family strategies. I'd like that context, Leo assured her. Your perspective is part of the Montgomery history too. The subtle acknowledgement that Edith herself was not merely a guardian of Montgomery tradition, but a living part of its complex legacy, with her own experiences, sacrifices, and adaptations, seemed to touch something rarely revealed beneath her formidable exterior. Your father was right about one thing, she told Leo with the ghost of a genuine smile. You have inherited the Montgomery analytical mind, the ability to see multiple facets of complex situations. From Dad, Leo agreed, and the ability to connect with people's emotions and experiences from Mom. I'm lucky to have inherited strengths from both sides of my family. The simple statement of dual heritage, acknowledging both the Montgomery legacy and the Larson influence in shaping his identity, represented a significant evolution in Leo's recent perspective. The boy who had been so eager to claim exclusive Montgomery identity just weeks earlier now recognized the value of his more complex inheritance from both family lines. That afternoon, as Edith guided Leo and Zoe through selected family archives with Asher and Freya present to provide alternative perspectives when needed, a new dynamic began to emerge. Not perfect harmony or complete agreement, but a more balanced exchange of family history where multiple viewpoints could coexist without one claiming absolute authority over the others. For Freya, watching her son engage critically but respectfully with his Montgomery heritage while maintaining his connection to the values she had instilled, represented a profound relief after weeks of growing emotional distance. The journey wasn't complete. Adolescent identity formation rarely follows a neat, linear path, but a crucial corner had been turned in Leo's understanding of how family history informs but does not determine personal identity and choices. The remainder of their Boston visit continued this pattern of more balanced exploration. Edith maintained her preference for formal Montgomery traditions, but with less insistence that these represented the only legitimate expression of family legacy. The twins showed respectful interest in their heritage while maintaining their own distinct personalities and preferences. Leo's analytical mind engaged with Montgomery business history without accepting its priorities as his own predetermined path, while Zoe's scientific interests remained primary despite Edith's continuing hints about more suitable pursuits for a Montgomery granddaughter. On their final evening at the estate, as the family gathered in the more intimate library rather than the formal dining room, Edith surprised everyone by producing a document that had not been part of their historical explorations. Your grandfather's final letter, she explained, handing the envelope to Asher. Written in the weeks before his death, when he knew he was unlikely to recover. Asher accepted the envelope with visible apprehension. He never contacted me directly during his illness. Pride, Edith acknowledged with unexpected candor. His and yours. The Montgomery trait that has damaged as many family connections as it has built business empires. Asher opened the letter carefully, its contents private between him and his father even as its existence marked a significant shift in Edith's previous insistence on perfect Montgomery unity in all family matters. As he read, his expression shifted from guarded caution to genuine surprise and something like regretful understanding. He was proud of Horizon's success, he said finally, looking up from the letter. Even while disagreeing with my methods and choices. He acknowledged that I'd found my own path to upholding the Montgomery commitment to excellence, if not in the form he had envisioned. Your father was complex, Edith admitted, capable of recognizing achievement even when it contradicted his preferences, though rarely able to express that recognition directly during his lifetime. Why show me this now? Asher asked, carefully refolding the letter. Because these children deserve a more complete understanding of their heritage than I initially offered, Edith replied, her gaze moving to Leo and Zoe, including the recognition that Montgomery stubbornness and pride have sometimes prevented necessary evolution and reconciliation across generations. The acknowledgement of flaws in the Montgomery approach, coming from its most dedicated defender, represented a significant shift in Edith's perspective. Not a complete abandonment of her belief in family legacy and tradition, but an opening to more nuanced understanding of how those traditions might adapt to changing circumstances and individual needs. "Thank you, Mother," Asher said simply, the complicated history between them acknowledged but not erased by this gesture toward reconciliation. "Does this mean you'll stop trying to send us to boarding school?" Zoe asked practically, bringing the conversation back to immediate concerns with her characteristic directness. "It means," Edith replied with dignity, "that I recognize your parents have primary authority in educational decisions, though I maintain that certain institutions offer advantages worth considering at the appropriate time. In other words, she'll continue to make suggestions, but with less undermining of our parental decisions," Asher translated with a small smile. A Montgomery compromise, maintaining her position while acknowledging other perspectives have validity. "Precisely," Edith confirmed, not entirely comfortable with this characterization but unwilling to dispute its essential accuracy. "The Montgomery legacy is adaptable, even as its core values of excellence and appropriate social position remain consistent through generations. And the Larson legacy of practical problem-solving and genuine human connection is equally valuable," Freya added pointedly, as the twins continue developing their own unique blend of both family influences. "Indeed," Edith acknowledged with surprising grace. "Though I maintain that the Montgomery name carries certain additional responsibilities due to its historical prominence and social position. It wasn't perfect agreement or complete reconciliation, but it represented a significant shift toward mutual respect and recognition that family legacies are not static entities to be preserved unchanged, but living traditions that evolve through each generation's interpretation and adaptation." For Leo, watching this exchange between the adults who represented different aspects of his heritage, the path forward seemed clearer than it had in weeks. The Montgomery history was part of him, a legacy of achievement and excellence that brought both opportunities and responsibilities. But equally important was the Larson influence, the values of authentic connection, practical problem-solving, and measuring success by meaningful impact rather than social status. "I think I understand better now," he said, his thoughtful expression reflecting the integration of these complementary influences. "Where I come from matters, but where I'm going is up to me. I can appreciate the Montgomery history without being controlled by it." "Exactly," Freya confirmed, her heart full at this evidence of her son's maturing perspective. "Your heritage is a foundation to build upon, not a script you must follow. Though certain aspects of family tradition deserve consideration," Edith added, unable to fully relinquish her position as guardian of Montgomery legacy, "particularly as you consider future educational and professional paths." "I'll consider all perspectives," Leo promised diplomatically. "Montgomery and Larson, traditional and innovative. But the final choices will be mine, based on my own interests and values." The balanced response, acknowledging his grandmother's perspective while maintaining his autonomy, demonstrated how far Leo had evolved from the vulnerable uncertainty that had made him so susceptible to Edith's influence just weeks earlier. He was finding his own voice, not simply echoing either family narrative, but integrating elements of both into his emerging sense of self. 1 year later, the Montgomery Larson family gathered to celebrate the twins' 13th birthday at their home outside Seattle. The party reflected the balanced integration of family influences that had developed since their transformative Boston visit, elegant without being formal, celebratory without excessive display, meaningful without rigid adherence to tradition. Edith Montgomery attended, her relationship with her grandchildren now established on more authentic footing. She still occasionally made suggestions about appropriate schools and activities, still maintained her preference for certain Montgomery traditions, but with decreased insistence that these represented the only legitimate path forward. More importantly, she had developed genuine interest in Leo and Zoe as individuals, not merely as vessels for continuing the Montgomery legacy. Leo's science project received the highest marks in his grade. She informed another guest with unmistakable pride. He's combined the Montgomery analytical precision with his mother's innovative approach to problem solving. A remarkable integration of family strengths. The guest, Naomi, who had witnessed the entire Montgomery drama unfold from its beginnings, raised an eyebrow at this revisionist presentation of family dynamics. "Interesting how the narrative has evolved," she murmured to Freya as they prepared the birthday cake in the kitchen. "From proper Montgomery air to integration of family strengths in just 1 year. Progress, not perfection," Freya replied with a smile. Edith hasn't abandoned her belief in Montgomery exceptionalism, but she's expanded the definition to include traits and values she previously dismissed as irrelevant or unsuitable. "And Leo?" Naomi asked, her concern for the boy who had struggled so visibly with questions of identity and belonging still evident. "How is he doing with all of this?" "Better," Freya said confidently. "The identity crisis hasn't disappeared completely. He's 13, after all, with all the normal developmental questioning that entails. But he's found a healthier balance between appreciating his Montgomery heritage and maintaining his own individual path." Outside on the deck, Leo was demonstrating his latest robotics project to an attentive Asher and several friends from school. The technical explanation was pure Montgomery in its precision and depth, but the project itself, a robot designed to help younger students with special needs navigate classroom environments, reflected the Larson emphasis on practical innovation that improved lives rather than merely demonstrated technical prowess. "And Zoe remains completely Zoe," Naomi observed with a grin. Watching the birthday girl orchestrate her friends in a complex dance routine she had choreographed despite Edith's continuing hints about more suitable artistic pursuits for a Montgomery granddaughter. "Completely," Freya agreed proudly. "She's interested in her Montgomery heritage, but not defined by it." When Edith suggested Smith College as an appropriate educational path, Zoe responded with a detailed presentation on MIT's engineering program and its superior alignment with her personal goals. At 13, Naomi laughed. "That girl knows exactly who she is and where she's going." "She always has," Freya acknowledged. The Montgomery influence affected her less deeply than Leo from the beginning. She took what interested her from the family history and politely ignored the rest. As the birthday celebration continued, Freya found a moment of quiet reflection, watching her family, both immediate and extended, interact with genuine connection despite their different perspectives and priorities. The journey hadn't been easy or straightforward, with moments of painful conflict and challenging realignment of relationships. But the result was a family system stronger and more resilient for having confronted these questions of identity and legacy directly. Asher joined her on the deck, slipping an arm around her waist as they watched the twins with their friends and grandmother. "Thinking deep thoughts?" he asked, recognizing her contemplative expression. "Just appreciating how far we've come," Freya replied, leaning into his embrace. "A year ago, I was terrified we were losing Leo to a version of himself that existed only in your mother's dynastic imagination. Now look at him, confident in his unique identity, able to appreciate his heritage without being controlled by it." "We underestimated him," Asher acknowledged. "His ability to process complex family dynamics and find his own path through competing narratives. He's stronger and more insightful than we realized." "They both are," Freya agreed, watching Zoe orchestrate her friends with natural leadership that combined Montgomery confidence with Larson practicality. "And so are we, as a family unit. Your mother's arrival forced us to articulate and examine our values more explicitly than we might have otherwise." "A silver lining to the Montgomery invasion," Asher said with a smile, watching his mother attempt to follow Zoe's dance instructions with dignified determination, if limited coordination. "Though I wouldn't have predicted this particular outcome a year ago. Life rarely follows the paths we anticipate," Freya observed. "5 years ago, I couldn't have imagined rebuilding a life with you after everything that had happened. 13 years ago, I couldn't have envisioned raising twins as a single mother while building a career in technology. And 16 years ago, I never would have predicted that an Uber ride would eventually lead to healing family wounds I thought would remain forever unresolved." "The most meaningful journeys are rarely the ones we plan," Asher agreed, his arm tightening around her waist. "But rather the ones that challenge us to grow beyond our carefully constructed boundaries and expectations." As the family gathered around the birthday cake, candles glowing in the early evening light, Freya felt a profound sense of completion. Not perfect resolution, Life rarely offered such neat conclusions, but the authentic integration of past and present, of complicated history and hopeful future, of Montgomery legacy and Larson values into something uniquely their own. Leo and Zoe blew out their candles together, their synchronized action reflecting the twin bond that had sustained them through every transition and challenge. Whatever paths they chose moving forward, whatever aspects of their complex heritage they embraced or redefined, they would carry with them the fundamental understanding that legacy informs but does not determine identity, that the most meaningful inheritance is not wealth or status or family name, but the freedom to chart one's own course with confidence and purpose. And in the end, that understanding was the greatest legacy any family could provide. If this story touched your heart and made you reflect on how family history shapes but doesn't define us, please subscribe for more powerful narratives about identity, legacy, and the courage to forge your own path even when faced with the weight of expectations. Share your thoughts in the comments about how you've navigated your own family influences while staying true to your authentic self. Because sometimes the most important journey is the one that leads us not to who others expect us to be, but to who we truly are.